Welcome back to our discussion of the Hindu faith, the Hindu religion, the Hindu religions, plural, whatever you prefer to call it. Hinduism is a lot like one of the regnant God concepts of Hinduism, namely that there is an absolute divine being, but that doesn't do you much good until it is refracted on several different levels of perception as a series of personal gods and various other beings. Well, there's an absolute called Hinduism at the highest level of abstraction, but it takes many, many forms. And as I said in the last session, pretty much every form we know of that ever existed still does, with a tweak or two here, you might say. I'd like to pick up again where we left off with the features of the Aryan sacrifice religion, and that which was imposed when the Aryan horsemen and warrior clans swept through the Mediterranean world, the Near East, and on through Iran and into India. And we looked at the sacrifices and the purpose of them and so on. I'd like to look at some of the major gods. I have a list of about a dozen, more than that actually, but even there I'm not covering all of them. Now you're just lucky that unlike times when I have taught this for credit in schools, I'm not going to be testing you on it. But that was one of the things I liked most doing, name that deity. But here you're getting it for free. Well, the number one god, if you want to make it a question of ratings, would be Indra. I-N-D-R-A, Indra, the warrior god, the thunder god. What do I mean by ratings? Well, certainly most of the hymns of the Rig Veda are addressed to Indra. He got prayed to more often than anybody else. He had that which most people, at least most officials, prayed for, namely victory in battle. It was a warrior culture. He became the king of the gods. He was not even in the mythology the original king of the gods. That was Varuna, who we'll get to in a moment. But Indra became the new king of the gods. According to their myth, which is very, very similar, or no surprise, I guess, to the Greek myth of Zeus succeeding the Titans in a generational conflict, generational succession conflict to be exact, and by killing a monster. And very similar, probably one just evolved into the other, but you find the same thing all over the ancient Near East and what are not considered Aryan-influenced cultures. You got it in the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Mesopotamians, the Hebrews, Babylonians, and so on and so on. The young warrior god, the storm god, the thunder god becomes the new king of the gods because the older gods are unable to deal with the threat posed by a dragon or dragons. The young warrior steps forward and says that if he is enthroned as the new king of the gods, he will take care of that monster that is frightening them, and they agree, and he does beat him and becomes the new king. And from this issues the creation, or as in the case of Indra, the recreation, the salvation of the world when it hung in the balance, threatened by universal drought. Same sort of a thing, though. And Indra, therefore, deserved his new kingship. Now, this almost has to refer to and reflect a social change. It just has to be that this god's partisans decided that he was the most important over against the partisans of Varuna, who had been the original king of the gods. What sort of machinations and social revolutions and military manipulations lay behind this, I do not know, but it's safe to say that there were some. Let me read you one of the Rig Veda's hymns about mighty Indra and how he killed the dragon Vritra. Let me now sing the heroic deeds of Indra, the first that the thunderbolt wielder performed. He killed the dragon and pierced an opening for the waters. He split open the bellies of mountains. He killed the dragon who lay upon the mountain. Svastor, Hephaestus, fashioned the roaring thunderbolt for him. Like lowing cows, the flowing waters rushed straight down to the sea. Wildly excited like a bull, he took the soma for himself and drank the extract from the 3 bowls in the 3-day soma ceremony. Indra the generous seized his thunderbolt to hurl it as a weapon. He killed the firstborn of dragons. Indra, when you killed the firstborn of dragons and overcame by your own magic, the magic of the magicians, at that very moment you brought forth the sun, the sky, and dawn. Since then you have found no enemy to conquer you. With his great weapon, the thunderbolt, Indra killed the shoulderless Vritra, his greatest enemy. Like the trunk of a tree whose branches have been lopped off by an axe, the dragon lies flat upon the ground. For, muddled by drunkenness like one who is no soldier, Vritra challenged the great hero who had overcome the mighty and who drank soma to the dregs. Unable to withstand the onslaught of his weapons, he found Indra an enemy to conquer him and was shattered, his nose crushed. Without feet or hands, he fought against Indra, who struck him on the nape of the neck with his thunderbolt. The seer who wished to become the equal of the bull bursting with seed, Vritra lay broken in many places. Over him, as he lay there like a broken reed, the swelling waters flowed for man. Those waters that Vritra had enclosed with his powers, the dragon now lay at their feet. The vital energy of Vritra's mother ebbed away, for Indra had hurled his deadly weapon at her. Above was the mother, below was the son. Danu lay down like a cow with her calf. In the midst of the channels of the waters which never stood still or rested, the body was hidden. The waters flow over Vritra's secret place. He who found Indra an enemy to conquer him sank into long darkness. The waters, who had the Daza for their husband, the dragon for their protector, were imprisoned like the cows imprisoned by the Panis. When he killed Vritra, he split open the outlet of the waters that had been closed. Indra, you became a hair of a horse's tail when Vritra struck you on the corner of the mouth. You, the one God, the brave one, you won the cows, you won the soma, you released the 7 streams so that they could flow. No use was the lightning and thunder, fog and hail that he had scattered about when the dragon and Indra fought. Indra the generous remained victorious for all time to come. What avenger of the dragon did you see, Indra, that fear entered your heart when you had killed him? Then you crossed the 99 streams like the frightened eagle crossing the realms of earth and air. Indra, who wields the thunderbolt in his hand, is the king of that which moves and that which rests, of the tame and of the horned. He rules the people as their king, encircling all this as a rim encircled spokes. Okay, this is very similar to the story of Yahweh defeating Leviathan and Rahab and creating the world and taking over the reign from his father, El Elyon, very similar to Marduk defeating Apsu and Tiamat, dividing their carcasses to make the firmament and the deep from them, and so on down the line. It's very, very similar. In this case, the dragon's challenge was to have hoarded all the water and kept it from raining, but Indra put a stop to that. Now, need I even say why the storm god and the warrior god are the same? Obviously, right? It's the sound of the thunder and the shining bolts of lightning. You figure, well, these have to be weapons that a god is throwing at somebody else, and the impact of them is heard loud and clear. So, yeah, everybody kind of concluded that. Well, the second greatest number of hymns are directed to Agni, the fire god, the high priest of the gods, the very personification of the altar fire, because without it, no sacrifice can be offered. Now, you could say Indra is the personification of the forces of nature, and surely you'd be right, but this is a little different. This is mighty interesting that Agni and Soma, which are parts of the ritual that really wouldn't have to be deified or personalized, wind up being made into gods. A very, very interesting trend. I think I explained a little bit as to why that might be last time and what the implications might be. What say we look at here's Goody, a prayer to Agni, whose name is the same as ignite, because that is what one is doing when one summons him. This one must have been prayed quite a bit. I pray to Agni, the household priest, who is the god of the sacrifice, the one who chants and invokes and brings most treasure. That's the answered prayer, right? That's what you're asking for. Agni carried the prayers of the ancient sages and those of the present too. He will bring the gods here. Through Agni one may win wealth and growth from day to day, glorious and most abounding in heroic sons. Agni, the sacrificial ritual that you encompass on all sides, only that one goes to the gods. Where they would make the grass square as the altar and light the grass, so he encompasses the sacrifice on all four sides. Agni, the priest with the sharp sight of a poet, the true and most brilliant, the god will come with the gods. He'll bring them. Whatever good you wish to do for the one who worships you, Agni, through you, O Angiras, that comes true. To you, Agni, who shineth in darkness, we come day after day, bringing our thoughts and homage to you, the king over sacrifices, the shining guardian of the order, growing in your own house. Be easy for us to reach, like a father to his son. Abide with us, Agni, for our happiness. It's pretty straightforward. So he's a fire god, but primarily the altar fire. Soma, we looked at last time, the god of the sacramental mushroom, also of the moon, because the moon was thought to be a great cup containing the water of life. And I rather suspect it kind of reminded people of the head of the Amanita muscaria mushroom, which is what Soma almost certainly was. And read a hymn to Soma last time. I won't read that again, but again, an element of the ritual has become part of it, as if the communion wafer became worshipped, not because it's derivative from Christ, but as if it were holy in its own right, to the point where it becomes personified. I believe it has in some extreme forms of Catholicism. The fourth of the great Vedic gods is Varuna, mentioned him a couple of times, the original king of the gods, and strangely enough, still doing the same jobs, just without the title. How's that, right? You get a demotion, still doing the same job, because as he once was, he still is the god of natural law, keeps the universe going on time, and moral law. If you're a sinner, you got to go to him for forgiveness. He's the one that makes justice triumph insofar as the intervention of the gods is needed. It might not be, as we'll see below, but He was considered to be in charge of natural law and moral law, and that didn't change even though Indra replaces him with the throne and the crown. Later, apparently, Varuna becomes worshipped as king of the gods and greatest of the gods again when the Zoroastrian religion splits off of Vedic Hinduism. There he is known by the title Ahura Mazda, that is the wise Lord or the Lord of Light. And so he's, you might say, demoted by the Aryan Vedics and promoted again, restored to former glory by Zoroaster. Zoroaster in the Gathas speaks not of the revelation of a hitherto unknown God, but the vindication, the restoration of priority of the greatest of gods, Ahura Mazda, who seems to have been Varuna. Also not unlikely to be identified with Uranos, the great heavenly titan of Greek mythology, though some dispute that. The argument hinges upon Sanskrit forms which I confess I know nothing about. Alright, so he was a great god of morality and so on. Do we want to read one of his? Why not? Let's take a look at the deeds of Varuna. I'm reading from Flaherty's Penguin Books translation. And I've lost my place, so I'll have that again in a second, though. There's so many good ones to choose from. I see one or two I want to come back to in a moment. Yes, all right. Somehow my pages are not cooperating, but I'll have them in a second. For the emperor, I will sing a splendid, deep prayer, one that will be dear to the famous Varuna, who struck apart the earth and spread it beneath the sun as the priest who performs the slaughter spreads out the victim's skin. He stretched out the middle realm of space and the trees. He laid victory in swift horses and milk in the dawn cows, intelligence in hearts and fire in the waters. Varuna placed the sun in the sky and Soma on the mountains. Over the two world halves and the realm of space between them, Varuna has poured out the cask, turning its mouth downward. With it, the king of the whole universe waters the soil as the rain waters the grain. He waters the soil, the earth, and the sky. Whatever Varuna wishes for milk, the mountains dress themselves in clouds, and the heroes, brandishing their powers, let them loose. I will proclaim the great magic of Varuna, the famous Asura, Lord, who stood up in the middle realm of space and measured apart the earth with the sun as with a measuring stick. Notice dared this great magic of the most inspired God, that these shimmering torrents pouring down do not fill the one single ocean with their water. Excuse me, that's exactly the kind of thing Heraclitus used as an illustration of the divine logos that regulated natural law. If we have committed an offense against a hospitable friend like Aryaman, another god, or a close friend like Mitra, or against one who has always been a comrade or a brother or a neighbor, one of our own or a stranger, loosen that offense from us, Varuna. If we have cheated like gamblers in a game, whether we know it or really do not know it, O God, cast all these offenses away like loosened bonds. Let us be dear to you, Varuna. So, well, let me just read you one other one. I want to underline this sense of personal responsibility and relationship to this God. The generations have become wise by the power of him who has propped apart the two world halves, even though they are so vast. He has pushed away the dome of the sky to make it high and wide. He has set the sun on its double journey and spread out the earth. And I ask my own heart, when shall I be close to Varuna? Will he enjoy my offering and not be provoked to anger? When shall I see his mercy and rejoice? I ask myself what that transgression was, Varuna, for I wish to understand. I turn to the wise to ask them. The poets have told me the very same thing. Varuna has been provoked to anger against you. Oh, Varuna, what was the terrible crime for which you wish to destroy your friend who praises you? Proclaim it to me so that I may hasten to prostrate myself before you and be free from sin. For you are hard to deceive and are ruled by yourself alone. Free us from the harmful deeds of our fathers and from those that we have committed with our own bodies. O King, free Visistha like a thief who has stolen cattle, like a calf set free from a rope. The mischief was not done by my own free will, Varuna. Wine, anger, dice, or carelessness led me astray. The older shares in the mistake of the younger. Even sleep does not avert evil. As a slave serves a generous master, so would I serve the furious God and be free from sin. The noble God gave understanding to those who did not understand. Being yet wiser, he speeds the clever man to wealth. O Varuna, you whom are ruled by yourself alone, let this praise lodge in your very heart. Let it go well for us always with your blessings. Kind of like that, very similar to Psalm 51 in some ways. Okay, and he will indeed become number one again. Well, the fifth one in our heavenly hit parade would be Rudra, the terrifying god of nature. He is both, as nature is, creative and destructive. Now, we think he's the same that is eventually worshipped as Shiva, which appears to have been a title, meaning the auspicious one, which, does that really help? How often do we use that word, even, like an auspicious proposition or something, a deal that looks promising? In this case, the idea would be he's the auspicious one, the one magnanimous and very likely to grant your request in prayer, but I wouldn't presume anything because he's a very fierce God. I mean, if he's as powerful as he needs to be to do what you want, that power can do what you don't want to. And the theory is that the original name Rudra, the red one, was displaced by Shiva, the auspicious one, because people didn't want to evoke this fearsome deity too quickly and too lightly. They didn't want to risk taking his name in vain, invoking it improperly, so they would distance themselves a little bit and hallow the name by using a substitute. Need I point out that is exactly the same thinking that led to the suppression of the divine name Yahweh in Judaism. Substituting for it with surrogates like Hashem, the name, or Adonai, my Lord, when the text actually has Yahweh. Seems like it might be the same thing here. So you speak of the devil and he'll appear. Well, if you're dealing with a God who is very, very powerful to the point of being frightening, you might want to be pretty careful. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to invoke you, oh mighty Rudra. Just pretend I didn't do anything. If I've roused you from sleep, you might not like it, and I might not like the result. So, what have we in praise of the mighty Rudra? Well, you bet we've got some good text for that. This reminds me a bit of one that appears in Monty Python's Meaning of Life. Forgive us, Lord, for this our dreadful toadying, and so on. Here it is. Father of the Maruts, who are kind of weather spirit, send your kindness here. Do not cut us off from the light of the sun. Let the heroes spare our horses, O Rudra. Let us be born again through our children. Why would you say that? Why not directly in your own right reincarnated? Well, these people apparently do not believe in that yet. We'll discuss that in a moment. By those most healing medicines that you give, Rudra, I would attain 100 winters, drive hatred far from us, and anguish further away, drive diseases away in all directions. Of what is born, you, Rudra, are the most glorious in glory, the strongest of the strong, with the thunderbolt in your hand. Oh, he's got one too. Carry us safely to the farther shore of anguish. Ward off all attacks or injury. We would not wish to anger you, Rudra the bull, by acts of homage or ill praise, or by invoking you together with another god. Raise up our heroes with your healing medicines. I hear that of all healers, you are the best healer. If someone should call in with invocations and oblations, thinking, I will appease Rudra with songs of praise, may the soft-hearted God who is easy to invoke, the tawny God whose lips are full, may he not suspect that of us and give us over into the power of his anger. The bull with the Maruts inspired me with his vital energy when I was in need of help. I long to win the kindness of Rudra as I would long to reach the shade unharmed in the heat of the sun. Where is your merciful hand, Rudra, so healing and cooling that removes the injury that comes from the gods? Have mercy on me, O bull. And there's more and more of it. Let me go down to verse 14. Let the weapon of Rudra veer from us. Let the great malevolence of the dreaded god go past us. And so on. So you've invoked him, but you understand his good side. We sing these praises. Oh, this is even better. This is even more Python-esque. We bring these thoughts to the mighty Rudra, the god with braided hair, who rules over heroes, so that it may be well with our two-footed and four-footed creatures, and in this village all will flourish unharmed. Have mercy on us, Rudra, and give us life force. We wish to bow low in service to you, who rule over heroes. Whatever happiness and health Manu the Father won by sacrifice, we wish to gain that with you to lead us forth. We wish to gain your kindness, Rudra, through sacrifice to the gods, for you are generous. O ruler over heroes, come to our families with kindness. Let us offer the oblation to you with our heroes free from injury. We call down for help the dreaded Rudra who completes the sacrifice, the sage who flies. Let him repel far from us the anger of the gods. It is his kindness that we choose to have. And so on. You get the idea. It gets more and more specific, Don't let this happen to us, don't let that happen to us. Like you're trying to sew up all the loopholes here because the God might be mischievous and say, well, pal, you asked for it. The sixth God in our pantheon, no particular reason behind the order now, just occurred to me in this order, would be Yama, Y-A-M-A. Yama, the death god, the king of the dead. Why? What would give a guy the clout to do that? Well, he was the first man, the first to die, the elder of the whole human race, and so he becomes king of the human race, most of whom are, need I say it, dead. And so it's kind of appropriate. And he rules the netherworld. King Yama, who will send his hounds after you, and so on. One sometimes sees depictions of Yama with golden fire that he has breathed forth, and bulging glassy eyes, 3 of them, one on the forehead, and a fanged maw. I have such an impressive Tibetan mask hanging on the wall. I got it from my mentor, Lynn Carter, who got it when he was in Korea. It's quite a thing. Look at that. Luckily, I don't sleep in that room. The 7th Vishnu, and don't tell me you haven't heard of him. He becomes a high god, and according to many Hindus today, he simply is God. But originally he was one of several sun gods, and not the most prominent of them. He I say they're one of many sun gods because various ancient nations and religions would personify the sun at different points in its daily course. So there'd be a sunset god, a sunrise god, a noonday god, an afternoon deity, an evening one where sun hasn't exactly set, but it's big and red, and so on. So they would personify the sun god differently for different aspects, and then of course it's also possible that some of these were simply the sun for different clans of Aryans who eventually merged and just kept both of their sun gods. That's not hard to imagine. But Vishnu was not one of the biggies. He's mentioned in just a few hymns in the Rig Veda and comes to incredible prominence later on, including today. In today's Vaishnavism, or Vishnu-worshipping Hinduism, we hear the stories of the various avatars of Vishnu, the descents, or in the descent to earth as an incarnation of Vishnu. Sometimes he comes in human forms and should be worshipped, like the great hero of the Ramayana, Ram or Rama, and sometime, or Krishna is another, and so forth. But he has also come to earth in the form of a fish or a boar or a kind of a fairy tale Rumpelstiltskin, sort of a dwarf character. And these are not to be worshipped, but they are at least recited as saving missions of Vishnu. I regard that as pretty fascinating, right? You've got animal avatars of Vishnu, as if, well, that would explain Lassie, I guess, right? Well, in one of these, he came down in the form of this little gnome-like dwarf and freed the world. After all, the avatar comes on a saving mission of one kind or another. Well, this giant has taken over the whole earth, and Vishnu means to trick him back out of it. And so he appears as this little dwarf, the very opposite of a giant, and he yells up to him, "Hi, Mr. Giant! Who's calling me? Down here!" And he says, "Oh, hi there, little fellow. What can I do for you?" And Vishnu says, of course he doesn't know who he is, but Vishnu says, "Mr. Giant, you've got the whole darn world. Do you think I can have a little territory?" "Well, why, sure, little fella. How much do you need?" And he says, "Well, how about as much as I can cross in 3 strides." "Well, that isn't much. Go right ahead." But little does he know that this is the sun god, and he assumes his divine form once again and is able to encompass the whole earth in 3 strides. Hence he's called the far-striding or the wide-striding Vishnu. And thus he saves the world. Kind of an interesting folk tale, almost like a joke, but it becomes one of the saving deeds, one of the mighty acts of this god, who again is not that big a deal in the Rig Veda, but later on he becomes a biggie. In fact, once he becomes simply God, they make a point of saying that he is the authority over Indra, who had become the chief of the Aryan gods. Well, the religion merged and changed. The later stages encompassing and reinterpreting the earlier ones. So we will get back to Vishnu and his doctrines of salvation when we look at a later theological more than earlier mythological type of Vaishnavism. I guess we could go into other sun gods, but I'd rather go into some that are more often mentioned, some other deities. The eighth one is Vayu, V-A-Y-U, the wind god, the son of Vishnu. And in later theology, he becomes the divine mediator between Vishnu and us sinners. The notion of a divine wind might put you in mind of the Holy Spirit, right? Because throughout the Bible there's this wordplay on Holy Spirit and mighty wind and so on in Genesis 1 and Acts chapter 2 and John chapter 3. Well, presumably it's the same sort of a thing here. This mediating deity who is a wind god, and he's mentioned as such in the Rig Veda as well. Ninth is Mitra, just referred to him in a hymn that I read you. Mitra means friendly, so it's an epithet, the friendly one. Well, he's a close friend of Varuna, the king of the moral order, and that fits because of his job. He is part of the divine administration. Mitra's job is to watch over and enforce contracts, pacts, treaties, and that kind of thing. It's like you and I may make a treaty, and I may think, well, I can sucker this guy and keep him docile until I'm ready to attack and take advantage of him. Hey, you better not think of doing that. You're not going to get away with it because Mitra sees. He sees what's happening here, and he's going to make sure you pay for it. It's just like when Jacob takes his leave of his Uncle Laban, sort of like Jerry and Uncle Leo. He says, may Yahweh watch between you and me while we're apart. He doesn't mean happy trails to you. He's not sentimentally saying, yes, may God protect you, Unc. No, he's saying, you shifty bastard, I know what you're like, and I won't be able to see what you're up to, but don't think Jehovah can't see, and he's going to see to you're getting what's coming to you if you welsh on this deal. Well, that's the whole idea of Mitra. He's the faithful friend of Varuna and safeguards his administration of justice. He will be your friend too if you are just. Now, Mitra, he, again, is kind of a minor deity since he's a hanger-on to Varuna, who once was king of the gods but is no more, right? But remember, you can't keep a good god down, and Varuna came back as the chief deity of the related Zoroastrianism, and Mitra came back with him, though often pronounced as Mithras, it's still the same name. This deity became, again, remained still the right-hand man of Ahura Mazda, and as that religion evolved over hundreds of years, Mithras or Mitra became even more important than Ahura Mazda and spawned its own religion in pre-Christian times. Because by the time, let's say when Jesus was born, the usual dates, the Mithraic religion was just all over the Roman Empire, cheek by jowl with its competitor, the Isis religion. And so Christianity was insignificant to begin with next to these other faiths, which no doubt influenced it. But Mithras became supremely important, and his cult even became the state religion of the Roman Empire before Christianity did. And so, and he is still worshipped. I don't think anybody maintains the specific rituals of the Mithras religion. We know a little bit about that. There are loads of Mithraea, these Mithraic houses of worship built in grottos throughout Europe. Hundreds of them in the British Isles alone, spread all over Europe by the Roman legionaries who loved Mithras, who was a two-fisted savior, would kill the divine bull and so on. Another variation on that creation hymn to the young warrior god killing the dragon. Same sort of deal. The Roman soldiers loved that. They would encounter it in the East on their tours of duty and bring it back with them. And so they spread his worship all over the empire. And it became the official faith of Rome for a good while. So, as if any god could have humble beginnings, I suppose one could say that Mitra or Mithras did, but then made a heck of a comeback and is still around. In fact, this reminds me of a funny moment on Jeopardy from some years ago. I was watching this, I guess, with my folks, and maybe my wife, who knows how long ago it was, and the category was mythology, mythical gods, some such thing. And so the first couple of questions are about Zeus and Hermes. Yeah, that's all right. They're safe game. But then Shiva came up, and I said, I guess it was to my wife, watch out. I bet the switchboards lighting up like a Christmas tree right now. And sure enough, when they came back from the commercial, there was old sort of Beck telling the audience, well, I don't know how that one got in there. Of course, we didn't mean to imply that Shiva is merely a mythological god. Yeah, I hope not, buddy, because Shiva is simply God to millions and millions of people today. And, you might be a skeptic. You might not believe in that God and say it's just mythic, but there are probably a lot of Indian folk watching that show, and so you don't want to sound too impious. You know what the atheists say, that virtually everybody is an atheist vis-a-vis most of the gods, right? There have been thousands of deities through history, and chances are your average Presbyterian, your average Catholic doesn't believe in Zeus and Wotan and things like that, right? So he's an atheist when it comes to that. There's just one exception. They've decided they are going to believe in the God of Christianity. Well, anyway, enough of that. I am dealing with it as mythology and theology, myth simply meaning that these gods exist in stories, and theology because they are still worshipped, whether as metaphors or as literal beings. Psychologically, if you start worshipping them, I don't know that you are much concerned at the moment with whether it's a metaphorical or in some sense a real being. I think you're going to go through the same mental motions anyhow. Alright, well, the 10th in my list is Savitar. Boy, do I love that name. Oh, that is a great one. Savitar, S-A-V-I-T-A-R, a sun god who drives the fiery chariot across the sky. Who else does this for a living? Well, you're right if you said Apollo does. Every day he gets up and takes the reins and flies across the heavens. And Helios was another one. And ancient inscriptions show Helios and Mithras both in a sun chariot. Sort of makes you think twice about the prophet Elijah, right? Because in Greek, Elijah becomes Elias, which is very similar to Helios. And how does Elijah leave the earth? He makes a zenith. He makes an ascension in a chariot drawn by fiery horses to the zenith of the sky. Well, to me, it kind of sounds like Apollo going up to the zenith of the sky at noon every day. Anyhow, so there's Savitar. But there's also Surya, S-U-R-Y-A, another chariot-driving solar deity. Surya is further said to be the son and husband of Ushas, the dawn goddess. That kind of ambiguous relationship isn't all that odd with gods or even with ancient royalty. but nonetheless, Surya is another charioteer, social deity, associated in one or two ways with Ushas, the dawn goddess, who was the same as the aurora of the Romans, the iris of the Greeks, and so on. The Shahar of the Bible. If I take the wings of Shahar and fly to the uttermost part of the earth, even there you will find me. The wings of who? The dawn goddess, the emerging, glowing semicircle of light across the horizon, struck the ancients as being like a big pair of wings. And so the Bible writers speak every once in a while of the goddess Shahar. The kings were born of the womb of Shahar. You see Isaiah 14, how you are fallen from heaven, O Halal, son of Shahar. Or Psalm 110, from the womb of Shahar your youth will come to you. And so on. But that would be Ushas, the dawn goddess. Surya especially lived in the body of the sun. And his father was the sky god, identified with either Dayush, so that's going to become Deus, God in Latin, or Father, Deus Pitar, Sky Father, Jupiter. And so he lived in the sun. The sun itself was his chariot. The 12th, yet another sun-related god, is Pushan, Pushan, a god of wealth and fertility, of cattle, because that was the big currency. If you were really rich, you had herds of cattle. And Pushan was the guide of travelers, and he conducted the souls of the dead to wherever they needed to go next. So the sun was seen in various phases, as we still say when we speak of the different kinds of weather. Why is the sun not out, or why is he out and turning up the heat on us as if the sun were making decisions? These are the biggies, though not the only Vedic gods, and it leaves out some other deities that were already there, like Kali and Krishna, who had blue skin, like that of the Dravidians, and thus they were already worshipped when the Aryans came in. And these gods do not appear, these Dravidian deities, they do not appear in the Rig Veda, at least not as deities. We hear a good bit about the victory of the Devas over the Asuras, that is, the gods worshipped by the Aryans, victorious over the uprisings of the Asuras, who were like the Titans in Greek mythology. Mighty, could even win if you're not vigilant, but they won't if you are. This was, I say, polytheism, but some began to move toward monotheism, and this by a couple of routes. At least I believe I am giving you the theory of the great Max Muller on this. For one thing, people began to notice that they accorded worship to the gods for the same thing for different gods. How many of them does it really say killed Vridra? Well, Indra certainly is said to have done that, but now and again you hear something about Agni doing it. Wait a minute, how can that be? Or you've got Indra wielding the Vajra, or the thunderbolt, like Thor's hammer. All right, that makes sense, he's the sun god. But, Rudra's a storm god too, so we hear of Rudra's Vajra. And you butter up the gods, well, literally in this case, since they use clarified butter in the sacrifices, but you just like in the Psalms, saying, "Oh God, you are so big, just so great. We're all impressed down here, I can tell you." We magnify God, say how great God is, After a while, you start thinking, gee, I've heaped so much praise on the God I'm worshiping at the moment. What have I got left to say to the rest of the divine company? You say the same old thing. And so eventually you start sharing out the same attributes. Oh, so-and-so the creator. Oh, the other guy is the creator. So-and-so the savior. So-and-so the savior. And this is what Muller called henotheism. Or to use that's almost misleading enough. What do you worship chickens? No. It's from one of the Greek words for one. You're worshiping one God. It's not that you think there are no other ones, like in strict monotheism. But there's also it's also called, and I think this is his preferred term, kathenotheism, which is a little bit more of a Greek phrase, kata henos theos, according to one, the gods. That is one God at a timeism. You speak to a God in worship, and worship seems to imply all praise. Well, doesn't that imply that maybe the gods you're worshiping are all one God? They've all done the same thing, because they're all the same deity. And so some came to a kind of monotheistic stance that way, which makes a lot of sense. And how many of these gods are there doing? They just reinventing the wheel all the time. Are they multiplying labor pointlessly? Well, there's also, another route, the cosmogonic one, that is, theories of the origin of how the universe was here. And different groups said, maybe we could tie everything together with one common deity, one great God who created all the others as part of a whole world, or maybe some kind of being that is somehow the whole world before it became differentiated. And so that may have led to it, to the belief that there is one deity. Now, that's certainly not all there is to that belief, because as I've said before, many Hindus came up with Vedanta or other kinds of Hinduism based on the mystical experience of oneness, saying that somehow beyond the senses, all is one, and that one is God. So you want to get back to the oneness. Here's some hymns about these abstract creator deities, often not called by the traditional names of traditional gods, because you're kind of leaving it open. Who is the creator exactly? Here's one. This is the 10th hymn of the Rig Veda. There was neither non-existence nor existence then. There was neither the realm of space nor the sky which is beyond. What stirred? Where? In whose protection? Was there water bottomlessly deep? Was there neither death nor... there was neither death nor immortality then. There was no distinguishing sign of night or of day. That one breathed windless by its own impulse. Other than that, there was nothing beyond. Darkness was hidden by darkness in the beginning, with no distinguishing sign. All this was water. The life force was covered with emptiness. That one arose through the power of tapas, or the heat generated by meditation. Desire came upon that one in the beginning. That was the first seed of mind. Poets, seeking in their heart with wisdom, found the bonds of existence in non-existence. And so forth. How about this? This is good. You can't leave this off. Their cord was extended across. Was there below? Was there above? There were speed placers. There were powers. There was impulse beneath. There was giving forth above. Who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? The gods came afterward with the creation of this universe. Who then knows whence it has arisen? Whence this creation has arisen? Perhaps it formed itself, or perhaps it did not. The one who looks down on it in the highest heaven, only he knows. Or perhaps he does not know. Oh, yikes. There's a goodie. Right, this is the agnostic creation. Really, we weren't there, but the gods can't tell us because they weren't either. So who knows? Maybe whatever earliest creator there was, but then again, he might not remember. Oh, if we need to know that, we're in big trouble. But according to this kind of thought, we don't really need to know it. Here's another one where there is kind of a scientific myth, that is, philosophers coming up with something that sounds like a creation myth but isn't exactly. In the beginning, the golden embryo arose. Once he was born, he was the one Lord of creation. He held in place the earth and this sky. Who is the God whom we should worship with the oblation? He who gives life, who gives strength, whose command all the gods his own obey. His shadow is immortality and death. Who is the God from whom we should worship with the oblation? He who by his greatness became the one king of the world that breathes and blinks, who rules over his 2-footed and 4-footed creatures. Who is the God whom we should worship with the oblation? He, through his power, owns these snowy mountains and the ocean together with the river Rasa. They say, who has the quarters of the sky as his 2 arms? Who is the God whom we should worship with the oblation? He by whom the awesome sky and the earth were made firm, by whom the dome of the sky was propped up, and the sun who measured out the middle realm of space. Who is the God we should worship with the oblation? He to whom the 2 opposed masses looked with trembling in their hearts, supported by his help, by whom the rising sun shines down. Who is the God whom the master? Who is the... Let's just cut to the chase here. Is more of this. Let's go down in verses 9 and 10. Let it not harm us, he who fathered the earth and created the sky, whose laws are true, who created the high shining waters. Who is the God whom we should worship with the oblation? O Prajapati, Lord of progeny, no one but you embraces all these creatures. Grant us the desires for which we offer you oblation. Let us be lords of riches. Now, who's that? Prajapati, the Lord of creatures, is what that means. It's an abstraction itself. It isn't really a name. Whoever it was, the Lord of creation or the Lord of creatures, well, that's a safe bet. He's the one we ought to worship. There's a similar one with hymn to Visvakarman, which just means the all-maker. It isn't really a name, it's just an abstraction. The sage, our father, who took his place as priest of the oblation and offered all these worlds as oblations, seeking riches through prayer, he entered those who were to come later, concealing those who went before. What was the base? What sort of raw matter was there? And precisely how was it done when the All-Maker, Visvakarman, casting his eye on all, created the earth and revealed the sky in its glory, with eyes on all sides and mouths on all sides, with arms on all sides and feet on all sides, the one God created the one God created the earth and the sky, fanning them with his arms, and more of the same. Those forms of yours that are highest, those that are lowest, and those that are in the middle, O All-Maker, help your friends to recognize them in the oblation. You who follow your own laws, sacrifice your body yourself, making it grow great. All-Maker, grown great through the oblation, sacrifice the earth and sky yourself. Let other men go astray all around. Let us here have a rich and generous patron. The All-Maker, the Lord of sacred speech, swiftest thought, we will call to him today to help us in the contest. Yeah, I'll bet. Another one, and this is very important, not just for Hinduism, though that would be important enough. Another one of these apparently abstract creator deities, not one of the old gods, but somebody hypothesized for the purpose. There must be a creator. Let's call him Mr. Creator. This one is from Purusha, which means the soul or the man. This god was eventually killed, sacrificing himself in the cosmic void to create the world from his own carcass. It's a rather different version from the combat myth in that he gives his life and rises in the form of the world, but he doesn't necessarily fight another entity. And so the creator is called Purusha, the soul or the man. Purusha has 1,000 heads, 1,000 eyes, 1,000 feet. He pervaded the earth on all sides and extended beyond it as far as 10 fingers. It is Purusha who is all this, whatever has been and whatever has been and whatever is to be. He is the ruler of immortality when he grows beyond everything through food. What? Sacrifices were rendered, the gods were being fed. So he grows through food offered him by his faithful. Okay. With verse 4, with 3/4 Purusha rose upward, and 1/4 of him still remains here. From this he spread out in all directions into that which eats and that which does not eat. From him Viraj was born, and from Viraj came Purusha. When he was born, he ranged beyond the earth, behind and before. When the gods spread the sacrifice of Purusha as the offering, spring was the clarified butter, summer the fuel, autumn the oblation. They anointed Purusha, the sacrifice born at the beginning, upon the sacred grass. With him, the gods, sadyas, and sages are sacrificed. From that sacrifice, in which everything was offered, the melted fat was collected, and he made it into those beasts who lived in the air, in the forest, and in the villages. From that sacrifice in which everything was offered, the verses and chants were born. The meters were... From that sacrifice in which everything was offered, the verses and chants were born, the meters were born from it, and from it the formulas were born. Horses were born from it, and those other animals that have 2 rows of teeth. Cows were born from it, and from it goats and sheep were born. When they divided Purusha, into how many parts did they apportion him? What do they call his mouth, his 2 arms and thighs and feet? Well, his mouth became the Brahmin. His arms were made into the warrior, Kshatriya caste. His thighs, the people, the Shaya. And from his feet, the servants were born, the Shudras. The moon was born from his mind. From his eye, the sun was born. Indra and Agni came from his mouth, and from his vital breath, the wind was born. From his navel, the middle realm of space arose. From his eye, the sky evolved. From his 2 feet came the earth, and the quarters of the sky from his ear. Thus they set the separate worlds in order. So the self-sacrifice of the primordial man created the world. Kind of makes you think of the Son of Man, who comes from Daniel 7 as a primordial being associated with the creation, though he conquers others, not himself in that one. All Right, so abstract creator deities, Prajapati, Lord of creatures, Vishvakarman, world maker, Purusha, the primal man of the soul. Well, we don't just get to monotheism, we get all the way to monism and pantheism, a more mystical view. And this we find attested in the Upanishads, which seem to have been written between 900 and 400 BC. But since there are over 100 of these treatises, these Upanishads, written by disparate people all over the place, it's a little hard to make generalizations about them because each one of these treatises is kind of a scrambled mess with different doctrines side by side. You can be sure that Hindu scribes would deny that. Some of them are busy harmonizing it all as if it all says the same thing, just as Christian harmonizers do with theirs. But even great Hindu theologians like Shankara admitted, no, there are contradictions, but that is only because some of it is written for the common person on the street without real learning or insight, and some is written for people with the beginnings of insight, and some for folks that really know what's going on, straight talk, and you got to have a similar erudition to know which is which. Well, I mentioned the Vedas, and we've looked at the gods of the Vedas, some of them. We've talked about the sacrifices that are prescribed in the Vedas. However, what I want to get into next is not directly the teaching of the Vedas, but rather of the Upanishads. Now, this gets tricky because we're about to discuss Vedanta, Hinduism. And one would certainly think Vedanta has to have something to do with Vedas, wouldn't you? Well, you're right, but it means the end of the Vedas, the culmination of the Vedic literature, which continued to grow and evolve into quite a canon after the 3 and then 4 Vedas became so entrenched canonically. Let's see if we can get this straight. You had first the original Vedas, and then there's a whole layer of second, let's say, hypertext commentary on the Vedas called the Brahmanas, Brahmanas. Could that have anything to do with the Brahmin priests? You bet! They wrote them. Could that have anything to do with the Brahman, the secret power that made the sacrifices effective? Right, again. Again, these words are really all the same in the original Sanskrit. It's just that they give us a little bit of a break in transliteration so that we can distinguish them slightly, and eventually you can keep them all straight. At least I think that's what I'm doing. All right, so there were the Brahmanas that are written about the Vedas. But time goes by, quite a lot of it, and even the commentaries require commentaries. And so people write treatises commenting upon the Brahmanas, and they are the Aranyakas. Again, that has to do with the Aryans, right, the noble religion and such. So you got the Vedas, the Brahmanas, and the Aranyakas. But that's not the end of it either. Is there ever an end to these things? The Upanishads, or as my great teacher Robert Streetman, fondly known by all as the Swami Streetmananda. He, with a Mississippi accent such as I have lost, used to refer to the Upanishads. I hope he wasn't right. He knew some Sanskrit, so he could have been right, but if so, I fear I shall have to just hope you'll forgive me for mispronouncing, because I'm going to go along with the herd, whether they're right or not, and say Upanishads, because it sounds just too darn silly to say the Upanishads. But if you're out there somewhere, Swami Streetmananda, forgive your errant Jedi. Oh, yes. Okay. These are the ones, just referring to, of which there are hundreds. They've all been rewritten and reworked and have layers of redaction and so on, and it's difficult to unravel them, but the seams that make it apparent that they have been rewritten have to do with the fact that you got different doctrines side by side in the same text, and you have that happen when people have a different view and feel like correcting the sacred text. Well, they couldn't have meant that. If they must have been as smart as me. Here's what they must have meant. Let me pencil it in. So you've got these layers: the Vedas, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, the Upanishads. Even that's not quite it. There was a definitive commentary trying to distill and systematize the teaching of the major Upanishads, of which people usually count some 12 to 14, and they kind of leave the others aside. And this book was known as the Brahma Sutra, and it was very cryptic. I mean, it was, I guess this is almost to be expected by now, but in its attempt to distill the teaching of this vast body of material, it's a little too concise. It's distillation to the point where it's kind of evaporated on you. It's hard to say exactly what the author meant in the Brahma Sutra, also called the Vedanta Sutra. What do you have? Well, take the words right out of my mouth. You had major theologians writing commentaries on the Vedanta Sutras, or Brahma Sutras. And we're going to get into one of them. Shankara, perhaps the greatest of all the Hindu philosopher theologians. So, his type of Hinduism, as well as that of rival commentators on the Vedanta Sutras, are known as Vedanta Hindu thinkers or Vedanta theologians. Doesn't mean they have the same opinions. Indeed, their opinions vary quite starkly. But their rival attempts to understand the same key to the Upanishads. And, so, again, so strange that within the same category you have what in the West would count as completely different religions. Such is the astonishing flexibility and vitality of the thought of the East. Okay, well, I need to just tell you one little thing we think we know about the authorship of the Upanishads and these earlier books between the Vedas and the Upanishads. We don't have any real names, though a couple of sages like Yajnavalkya are mentioned by name here and there, but they're not really said to be the writers. It's like Moses is very prominent in the Pentateuch, but doesn't mean he wrote it. But we have occasionally an interesting statement that the teaching given in this or that Upanishad was taught to one of the Brahmins by a Kshatriya, warrior or king or sage. Now, you'd think it would be just the opposite. You'd think it would be the religious nabobs, the guys like the Brahmin priests who would teach the truth, especially since we're talking about commentaries on the priestly books that only the Brahmins read. And indeed, it seems clear that Brahmins must have written all these books that reinterpret one another. And this seems to get complicated. It is not. It appears, just to answer a question, I'm probably going to have to go back and elaborate it, that the Brahmins wrote all these books in order to read into the old Vedas a bunch of alternative religious ideas that they had never heard of, but that the Kshatriya had. And once they heard of him, the Brahmin said, geez, that sounds pretty darn good. But we don't want to reject the scriptures that we have studied. They're the truth. It must be that this new revelation, this new bunch of insights these Kshatriya brothers have discovered must be implicit in Scripture. And you remember from last week, if you were anywhere near that point, and you said that to yourself, you're basically saying, I'm confused on this. If you say, this really renders Scripture superfluous, what do I need Scripture for? You're not going to be considered a Hindu, and that would be like the Buddha and Mahavira and so on. If you say, this stuff seems true, it must be in the Scripture, and I can get it out by hook or by crook, you remained a Hindu. The question is whether you use the Scriptures, not what ideas you have. So there's that. Now, the basic doctrine that Kshatriya sages, the warrior and king caste, the second caste, the doctrine they came up with is really wholly different from anything regarding sacrifices, and indeed made sacrifice superfluous. The way I want to put this is one of the ways I've read it. Following the thought progression of the priests. I do want to do that. Let me give you the punchline. The Vedanta doctrine winds up saying the holy is within, the divine power is within, and the way to unlock that is through diving deep within in meditation. Sacrifices, even if there are gods whom they invoke, even if they gain the benefits for which you pray them, they don't matter. Because real salvation is not just getting Santa to bring what you want for Christmas. You're talking about a change of consciousness that will go on through eternity, real enlightenment. And so the religion of sacrifices where you got victory in battle or good crops or whatever, that's just not really the business of religion, let's face it. Mysticism is. Now this is what some of the warrior caste were thinking. Not really as warriors, but as religious people looking for an alternative spiritual path than the sacrifice religion, which is pretty external, right? You're just bringing animals to be butchered at the altar, right? You decide, look, I just don't see any fulfillment in that. And you need the interior experience of the holy, and you find it by meditating. Well, if that's true, and I'm a member of the warrior king Kshatriya caste, I really don't have to care about the blusterings of the Brahmins and their priestcraft and the money and the sacrifices they would exact. I don't care. Let them say what they want to say. There's no skin off of my nose. They've created a racket. I'm not falling for it anymore. Let them get mad if they want. They can threaten me with hell all they want. I don't believe it, and it was only my belief that ever gave it power. Okay, so that would be Kshatriya repudiation of the priestly religion of the Vedas, right? Now suppose some Kshatriya is debating this matter. I mean, I know this is anachronistic, but suppose some Brahmin is strolling by and sees this Kshatriya chieftain and says, "Hey, Rama, haven't seen you at the sacrifice lately. I hope everything's okay." And he says, "Well, tell you the truth, your priestliness, I'm just not showing up again. It's a big charade, and you're out to make a buck. I'm done with that. I'm washing my hands of it, because the real spiritual truth is within, and that's where you have to seek it, and the real sacrifice is inside." Well, of course, a lot of the priests must have heard of this and said, that's heresy, that's blasphemy, I'm excommunicating your butt, and so on. But you know that a lot of these holy men heard this, like priests hearing the teaching of Martin Luther. Some of them said, geez, that sounds pretty good, I have to admit. But I just can't imagine the scriptures are false and the sacrifices are superfluous. I just bet you it's some kind of Old Testament, New Testament thing. It's some sort of shadow and substance thing. I just bet you that the sacrifices we perform are somehow a charade pointing to the real spiritual transformation that you guys have discovered. I mean, it's obvious you're right. But I bet you there's a bridge between what we've always been saying and what you have discovered. And what's that bridge? Well, to say that there is a sacrifice that awakens a hidden power, and in that sacrifice, and goes to the gods and opens the way to the divine, but it happens inside. And this is where yoga comes from and so on. That the sacrifice is the ritual, if you will, of meditation, of sacrificing awareness of all worldly objects of consciousness, concentrating on going within, uncovering the mustard seed of the Atman inside you, and causing that to blossom by meditation. And that is occult virtue, hidden power, as you find out, as you meditate more. And then you realize that this Atman is Brahman. Instead of me down here and the gods up there, I have collapsed the distance between them because I suddenly wake up to the fact there's no other gods but me. I don't mean me, the selfish little ego. Rather, my own consciousness is just a little porthole through which I view a vast ocean of divine consciousness. That's awakening. That doesn't have anything to do with little worldly blessings like God giving you parking space when you need it or anything like that. No. But this is the real thing. And yet, one can describe it in terms of the scriptures. This, you know how natural that is. Think of, what is it, Romans 12:1, that you should not be conformed to this world and worldly patterns, but rather do everything you do as a sacrifice of God by doing it mindfully, with spiritual or rational worship. And boy, that in my opinion is exactly the punchline of the Upanishads. They differ theologically in a lot of ways, but the basic idea is that the sacrifice is inside, and the blessing you're getting is the knowledge of that divine oneness. And you don't need the sacrificial terms to get there, and indeed the Kshatriyas had just shucked it off. They didn't care. They weren't going to go to the sacrifices anymore. But this is precisely the sort of rationalization you would have to make if you were one of the priests, right? And let me just use another comparison from Western religion. I don't know which is more familiar to you, more natural, so if this is just getting you further off the track, don't bother with it, but I think it's helpful to think of Marcionite Christianity versus Jewish Christianity. Here's this new thing, faith in Jesus Christ the Revealer. And you got two choices. If you're coming out of Judaism and you've always loved Judaism, but you can't deny there's something to this, what are you going to do? You're going to say, I just bet you that the Jewish scriptures really anticipated this Christian stuff, albeit, symbolically. You have to view it with the eye of faith, and you'll see that it was meant to be fulfilled in Christ. So, yeah, we're carrying the old along with us, but we're really in the new. Then the Marcionite Christians said, it's just a lot of ventriloquism. It doesn't naturally mean that. I mean, if that was the meaning of the Old Testament scriptures, the Jews whose scripture it is would have seen this long ago, and they didn't. You're just trying to read the new thing back into the old. What's the point of that? Just admit that this new thing is newly revealed and get on the bandwagon. For those that want to stick with the old thing, let them do it. It's theirs anyway. So, and you see what's happened is, thanks to the Brahmin priests getting on the bandwagon and writing up the Upanishads and such in order to try to make it look like the Vedas taught this meditative doctrine, you've got this insight of mystical meditation preserved within the boundaries of Hinduism and justifying the use of the Hindu scriptures. Of course, it doesn't hurt to write these latter-day commentaries on them, which become, in turn, new layers of scripture, right? We've seen that happen. And so you're a Hindu if you do that, like Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, and others we're going to discuss. But if you took the Marcionite sort of approach and said, look, this is a new thing, let's just drop the old-time religion, well, then you're a Buddhist or a Jainist or some such sect. You have very similar views to many who are still called Hindus, but you've rejected the parent tradition with its scripture, no matter how similar your doctrines are. And it's the scripture that seems to be the thing that determines whether you're in a new religion or an old one. And so that's some account of the interesting paradox that you got Brahmins writing treatises as if commenting on the Vedas, the scriptures, trying to reconcile the Vedas with the new insight in order to salvage the Vedas, so they won't just have to dump them like the Buddhists did. And so you got all this long canonical evolution from the Vedas to the Vedanta. And not to say there are not other types of Hinduism too, because there are, and we're going to discuss some other ones. But what say we look at, we start up with Vedanta Hinduism, with the most famous of the sages. I already mentioned Shankara. Again, he is commenting on the Upanishads and then even more immediately on the Vedanta Sutras. And there are certain phrases in the Upanishads that carry great power for people in this framework. Again, it had to do with the Atman, A-T-M-A-N, and others, the self, the individual divine spark, and the Brahman, the universal, divine, absolute spiritual reality. And the goal is to recognize that they are the same, not to make them the same, not to unify them, but to have illusion fall away so that you will recognize what was always true. That's the ticket. And what is true? Well, as it says here and there, that thou art, tatvamasi, the great passage where a sage is quizzing his son, newly back from his graduate studies, about things religious and spiritual, and he says, tell me what the Atman is. And he tries to come up with an answer, and his dad says, no, it can't be that. What, is it like nature? No. Is it like the sun up in the sky? No. And after a whole bunch of possibilities, he says, all right, I give up. What is the Atman? And his father says, that thou art, tatvamasi, it's you. And in another way, the Upanishads put it, this Atman is Brahman. Now, Nietzsche would say that's a kind of linguistic imperialism. You're trying to cash in, you're trying to pass one thing as if it's another and to steal the prerogatives of the one for the other. But no. Here they're saying, no, your problem is, your confusion arises from the fact that you somehow don't see the oneness of all things, and that oneness is divine. Your pipsqueak egotism comes from the absurd misapprehension that you are different from everybody else and that you are the center of attention, not it. I mean, that's what's pathetic. Jung, who certainly knew a lot about this, says something very similar when he says, tell you what, let's call it the ego and the self. The ego is an adolescent, arrogant, self-absorbed focus that we have for a long time and eventually grow out of, we hope. Most people do, and it may be tough. People may have to do a little intervention and say, look, you're being a jerk here. Let me set you straight. But, you are first an egotist, but you have to be. Jung said you've got to consolidate an individual selfhood first, even if you are kind of a bullheaded ignoramus. Because, you see, that's just a stopping point. What you're doing is to build a launch pad to launch the rocket to the capital S, self. The whole process of personal growth Jung called individuation. And you've got to become a true individual, and that kind of keeps going toward maybe the opposite of what you would think, opposite direction. You open up more and more to all beings, and their concerns become yours. And you don't even think of sacrificing your interests to seek the betterment of others. No, your interest is that they prosper. There's no difference anymore, because the self has expanded and expanded out from its center point to where it really has a universal periphery now, a universal circumference. It coincides with everything, as the great saints and mystics have done. And when that happens, Jung liked to say you have a self, and in English they would always print out the capital S. You had to start with the ego, which is sort of a false self, but you had to do that to consolidate it and then make it a jumping off point. Well, in the Upanishads, they say, okay, you got a false self, like the ego, but I think the word they use for that is jiva, a living subject. But what the heck, since it's a little more familiar, you could just say the ego self. That has just the kind of slightly pejorative implication we're looking for here. And then you got the real self, the eternal, unchanging, unconditioned spark of the divine, and that is the Atman. When we get into reincarnation, we find that it is the Atman that survives the death and rebirth process. But this is not the psychological self, the self that shows up on all those personality profile tests and those vocational surveys you took in high school and so forth. Now, that would be the ego. The Atman is not the defensive selfhood you may cherish. Okay, it's not that great, but it's all I got, and I'm kind of attached to it. No. It's beyond that. It's not your likes and dislikes. It's not even what your experiences have made you. I mean, whatever that is, you do have it. That's what you see in the mirror. That's what you've come to love or hate, or both at the same time. But that isn't the real self. That doesn't change. That is ineffective, or I should say non-effected. And you're carrying it with you, as it were. And they like to use the example, a metaphor of a monkey swinging through the jungle holding a banana. The banana is utterly unaware of the scenery and the velocity of this little trip it's taken in the monkey's fist. In the same way, your Atman knows nothing of the ludicrous travails and adventures that your little ego is carrying along on. So the real self is what you have to awaken, and when you do, you'll find out that that is divine. It has never changed. It has never suffered. Why such a rush to try to disentangle the two? Well, because the error of thinking that the true you is one of these ridiculous characters, or any suffering character in the world, is that you're multiplying suffering that didn't need to exist. I kind of like this illustration, though it's a little bit odd. They would say that your ego self is material in character. It's wouldn't brain science back this up? Right, that thought can be traced. It's an electrochemical impulse in the brain that goes into the nervous system and allows you to move your limbs and so forth. And yeah, what do you know? My thoughts that seem so subjective and spiritual to me are chemical in nature and are part of the body. That's the ego. But what else is there? Well, there's this Atman that could never be discerned the same way. It's not living in the same place. It's not on the same plane. It is not physical in nature. It is purely spiritual. It can't be detected or shoved into a test tube or anything like that. And the relation between the two is like that of a battery and a flashlight. The Atman is like the power cell that has to be in the flashlight, or in our terms, it has to be conjoined with the ego to illuminate the ego, to make it possible for us to subjectively experience pain or joy or anything else. But the bottom line is always pain and suffering in these things, since ultimately it comes down to that. You want to escape that. Well, as long as you got that battery in the flashlight, the battery is not illuminated, it is illuminating, right? It makes it possible for the flashlight to expose and allow things to be seen. But the battery is not seeing them. So what you need to do to stop illuminating in emotion the sorrowful things of the world and the pains of death and so on, is to unscrew that thing and drop the flashlight battery out of it. And that is what you're doing, because then no illumination, no subjective experience of the world of pain, of samsara, as they call it. The battery, which never felt any pain, still does not. It's still autonomous. But the confusion has been dropped so that you no longer have this unnatural coupling whereby the energy source, the battery, fueled this perception of a painful existence. Well, that sounds good, maybe. It probably could sound better than I have done explaining it, but what would it actually mean in practice? I mean, would you still be around experiencing the world and not having any pain and vulnerable to it? Well, maybe, yeah. Maybe that is what you would have. The yogis, the meditators, all speak of the state of mere witness, just watching things go by, a kind of detachment. Not indifferent, not the kind of detachment that would make you just pass by on the other side when you saw the wounded guy in the parable of the Good Samaritan. No, you would help people. In fact, you would certainly do it more than you ever did, because now you would be freed from self-interest and favoritism. You would have an impartial compassion for all beings. Buddhism really capitalizes on that, but it's the same idea here. And you become a Mahatma like Gandhi. Your soul will encompass all. And but the thing is, again, no personal ties. And this, for some of these great Hindu saints, this has meant a kind of mind over matter sort of a thing. At least we're told this. Where, I remember it was one of these great Vedanta guys in the 19th or 20th century. He goes in for painful throat surgery, and technically he knows that kind of thing is an illusion, right? So what happens? Well, he doesn't ask him for anesthesia. though it probably would have been all right if he did. But they tell him this has got to hurt, and so he says, "Just give me a minute." And he goes into a kind of meditative trance and says, "All right, go ahead," and he doesn't feel a thing. I assume that is true. It was presented to me as from sources close to the guy, and I certainly do not find any problem in believing that through mental effort one can quiet pain. And yeah, you are not present to it any longer. I think Houston Smith describes the scene this way, that you have so disengaged your identification with the ego that in a situation of suffering, your higher self would be looking on saying, "Geez, that poor Price. He is suffering there under the drill at the dentist. That's too bad." But I, in the dentist chair, would be identifying with the Atman that doesn't suffer. And so though I'm aware of the suffering, I sort of don't consider it mine somehow. And so it is not as unpleasant. And I'm far from ever having been enlightened, but just to try to illustrate the idea of the distancing of pain, I was out in the blistering heat of July, and not this year, and I was down in Mississippi, and we were interring the ashes of my mother and father in the family plot in Mississippi. And I was given the brief service, and I had this long black cassock on. And so I remember it was so hot, I had this thing on that made it a lot hotter, that it was as if it was happening to someone else. I'm sure there must have been emotional disjuncture there too, and that's a very interesting element of it. But it was so hot, it somehow distanced me from it. And I think, in a way, though for better reasons, that is happening in the state of mere witness. So yeah, they're not just talking out of their hat, right? This is not just theory. It actually has practical application, though that is not the goal of it. The goal is not some cheap trick to avoid feeling pain at the dentist. It's just kind of a minor byproduct of the thing. And but yeah, all yoga we're going to find has this notion of mere witness, and letting the world go by, doing what you do during the remainder of this earthly life, but not for worldly reasons, and with interesting implications. Okay. The Atman and the ego self. It's the Atman that is God. It is not the individual personality who is God. They'd probably think you were a bit of a nut if you thought that in that sense, that aspect of you is divine. It isn't. That's one problem I've always had with New Age pop teaching, that you as you are God. I don't think that's the point of it. That's narcissistic delusion. The major idea of Vedanta, as Shankara understood it from the Vedanta Sutras, was that there are at least two categories of levels of reality and of perception. There may be more than that, but the principle is set this way. We can elaborate later. There is higher knowledge, there is lower knowledge. There is higher reality and lower reality. Scripture speaks of both in different places and counts on being read by readers of higher and lower knowledge. And so if you read everything from either standpoint, you're going to find contradictions. If you realize what level you as the reader are being addressed on, there really aren't contradictions. You're just realizing when the channel has been changed. which is not a bad way of looking at it. I guess Origen did the same thing with the Christian scriptures. So he said if you find some inaccuracy or absurdity, taking it literally, that's just a red light telling you that that's not the way to take this passage. That tells you that, it must mean something else. Oh, by golly, I better know what it is. And so, again, you can look at it with a superior depth of meaning. And so let's try to fill those in with a little bit with the brief time we have remaining today. What is lower knowledge? It is knowledge or apprehension about the lower world, the world of ordinary consciousness, the world as most people see it. You might say in literary terms, verisimilitude. This is a literary term that counsels the writer to make it believable by satisfying, by meeting the expectations of the reader or the viewer in painting. I remember my painting teacher told our class once, if you're painting a scene with a cloud, it sort of has to follow conventional dimensions and relations. And you're going to say, look, but Professor DeLue, I saw a cloud. I got a picture of it right here that I photographed, and it was in this shape, in this relation to this mountain and this tree. I don't care. He says, that looks unusual. Most people will think it looks unusual, and you'll be drawing attention to the wrong thing. Unless this is some believe it or not deal, right? So you have to make it seem verisimilar. That is, you have to make it seem like reality as people expect reality to be, based on their assumptions, whether well or ill-founded. And that's the case here. Lower knowledge is not truth, but verisimilitude. You are interpreting the world through a grid of expectation, and you are seriously wrong about it. Now, it all works in a certain way. You don't have the sidewalk disappearing every few steps you take, or the air suddenly vanishing or something. No, in fact, that's why it's so tempting and enticing a delusion. It seems to work very well, but sometimes you do come up to some rough edges, like suffering and frustration and injustice, and you think, geez, why is it this way? Why does it suddenly run out here? Why does it stop working? Hey, now you're beginning to get it. Maybe it's like, what is wrong with this picture? And then maybe you're ready for a little higher knowledge, that is, knowledge of the world the way it really is, which is the Atman or the Brahman. They're ultimately the same, ultimately the divine essence of all things, undifferentiated, undefined, the luminous, joyful consciousness of luminous, joyful consciousness. Kind of like the blissful self-absorption of the God of Aristotle, I would think. That is, it's not just, well, they often say it's dreamless sleep. Madame Blavatsky didn't like that too much. She said, what are you telling me? It's just liberation. It's the same thing as just blanking out, that it's annihilation. No, the sages of Hinduism says, aren't you always kind of sad when you have to wake up from a good sleep? Wouldn't you kind of like to remain asleep because it's not just oblivion? There is some sort of fullness of emptiness in that. Yeah, of course you know that. In the same way here, there would be this opening up of consciousness to all else that is part of it. And that is the higher knowledge, the highest knowledge. Let me give you an example from a TV commercial that I really love. It was, I think, a Bell telephone ad. And the goal was to convince the viewer that the sound on their phone is absolutely perfect compared to other people's contraptions, and though the point was audio fidelity, they used this great video image. And as I recall this thing, there's a man in a lotus position, silhouetted in black against a brilliant blue sky with occasional cloudy tufts in it. Again, he is in black, silhouette against it. But suddenly, the light goes on, and you still see, I guess, an outline or something. But now there's no difference between the lightly clouded blue sky outside the figure and inside the head of the seated figure. Meaning he is perceiving what is without exactly as it is and continuously with it, as if the limits of the man's awareness had fallen away, and there is no difference between the knowing and what is known. I like another analogy for this, one of amnesia and the awakening from it. You've probably seen movies where somebody has amnesia and they're really, they don't know what they used to be like. And it may turn out that they find out and they're sorry they did because they were a worse person before. And now they've changed without all that baggage. But be that as it may, while they are amnesiac, they have lost a portion of their selfhood. The portcullis is slammed down on the you they used to be. They've lost it. So they're dealing with just what they have of themselves in this moment, in this present. Well, that's understandable, but try this on for size. Suppose it isn't back in time, the you of yesterday you lost, but rather the larger, wider you on every side now. Suppose there was a larger you, not just temporally, back in time, but simultaneously now, that encompasses everybody and everything else. But you have shut yourself off from it somehow. Maybe you're just told that the boundaries of your selfhood are right here. They're pretty narrow, and that's that. But you somehow manage to attain the sense of oneness with everything around you, and you realize, geez, what I call my life really is myself. It is whatever I experience, all the people, all the places. That is as much me as the thoughts I'm thinking right now. So you're not, like the person recovering from amnesia knocks down the wall between yesterday and today. The person that passes on to higher knowledge knocks down the walls that surround this portion of his selfhood present to awareness, and makes the whole darn thing flood in. And this awareness knows no bounds. I have not experienced this, I will not kid you, but I think I understand the edges of its ways. I think those analogies point to what people certainly do experience. In fact, recent brain science makes it very clear that people experience this. There's no doubt. It has to do, apparently, with the functioning of the temporal parietal lobe of the brain. When you are in the womb and an infant, you experience what Freud called the oceanic sensation. You're one with all, but once you're born and begin to perceive others as others, some little doohickey in the temporal parietal lobe of the brain comes online and enables you to differentiate between yourself and others. Well, one can learn through meditation to disengage this little gizmo, and one feels the oceanic feeling of unity again. So I don't think there's any reason to doubt this. We're not talking about any debatable hocus-pocus thing. There is a big debate there as to whether one needs any supernormal explanation. I doubt that one does, any more than dream interpreting does. But I don't want to close myself off to any explanation of anything either. This is the higher knowledge, the knowledge that Atman, this Atman is Brahman. And I want to change the subject and deal with a new one next time, but I should just spell out a couple of more implications that will help us for next time. Lower knowledge is considered real knowledge when that's all you've got. But once you awaken to higher knowledge, lower knowledge is considered ignorance, because it is ignorant of what comes from higher up, right? It is ignorant of a fuller truth. You have competency and maturity even, and wisdom perhaps on this worldly plane, and the better you fit it, the better you get along, the less likely it is you will see that there is another zone, much less navigate it. The worldly person isn't thinking that much of the next level. But once you do, you look back on the level of present experience as the Bible says, like in Psalm 90, as a dream when one awakes. You begin to realize that, yes, you can speak of levels of reality in a convincing way, a natural way. Suppose someone told you, hey, let me tell you about this dream I had. I was being chased by some sort of a monster, and they go on and on and say, wow, that sounds pretty scary. It's impressive. You ought to write that up into a story. And say, I'm just kidding you, that's all it is. I didn't really have a dream. Oh, well, good story, though. But that sticks with it. You go home and you have a nightmare based on that story. And while you have it, the werewolf is running you down. You're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get killed. And you're having an experience of panic. And then you wake up and you say, whew, I'm glad that was only a dream. Well, you got 3 levels of reality right there. Right? Somebody told a good story, and for the moment you suspended disbelief and let yourself be carried along with it, and it was entertaining. But that's all. I mean, it worked. It was quite apropos. The heed you gave it for what it was, the story, yeah, that's appropriate. That's lower knowledge of a lower level of reality. Then you have a dream, and while you're in the dream, you're really scared because it seems like this one is really happening. But then you wake up. And you say, wow, it was some darn dream. Thank God it's not really like this. So you've graduated to a higher level of reality and your knowledge matches it. What if there were a higher level still? Well, again, we know there is if you ever studied psychology or sociology of knowledge or any, especially that one. You start understanding social conventions and why people do what they do in a way they will never understand it. And you have a higher gnosis. You tend perhaps to be a little more cynical. I mean, that's the downside of it for some people. And this is because you don't want to be fooled again, right? But it's in our own experience. We have this kind of thing. It's nothing that odd. It's nothing spooky or even counterintuitive. I guess that's my point. And so, what would the highest knowledge be? Well, I've already said that. This blissful trance state that transcends all worldly knowledge. And worldly religion, and I'll stop once I get this out. Shankara and his type of Vedanta says, you know what? The stuff you believe in, and you might even have experienced in visions, the existence of the various gods, a creator god even, the incarnations of the gods, the death and rebirth cycles of the universe, all that stuff. Yeah, that's part of lower reality. You're not wrong about it. You go into the temple and singing the Vedic hymns and all that, and your prayers are answered. Hey, look, I'm not saying they're not. And in fact, Shankar wrote hymns of his own. But eventually, he says, you graduate beyond that, and you put away childish things, and, or as the Buddha will say, you've passed over the river on your raft. Now that you're there, you just don't need the raft anymore. Well, certain ideas serve their purpose to liberate you once, but they've done their job. You don't need them. Why continue as if you did? And so the enlightened person who no longer believes in a God to whom one must pray because one realizes the divine reality and I are the same. This kind of person is maybe in big trouble, may be branded a heretic, and because others may say, look, you can't just throw away a personal God in religion. And this has happened many times. I just satisfy myself with one example. The great philosopher Spinoza, who was called by his contemporaries both an atheist and God intoxicated. Wait a minute, I'm talking about the same guy. How could that be? Well, because he was a pantheist, a view somewhat, well, a view you find in the Upanishads, too, not exactly the same as this, close enough, the view that all things are the faces or the appearances of God. God is the divine nature in all things, and really, ultimately, all that exists. All these apparent individual things are faces of God. They're real, but they're really God. And is there some other God on top of them? Well, no, that would be kind of silly, actually. You don't want to drag God down into our categories and limit God to a personhood, making him a kind of a Santa Claus. No, God is so great as to exist in all these forms. There's not some other personal form beyond it. No. So, yeah, God intoxicated. Everywhere this guy looks, he sees God as if it's a pink elephant. But at the same time, an atheist, because there's no God as one being among others. Well, the Shankara got into that kind of trouble, too. And next time I want to start out with a couple of major reactions against him by Ramanuja and